All right, let's get into this one. It's going to be weird. Kriega Bundle. We're going to do something a little different on the channel today, and I'm making an episode today that's a bit of a mishmash of two different topics, but they're two topics that are important to me that I thought we should cover. So, warning for you Robert E. Howard fans, pretty much the front of this video, or the first component of this video, is probably going to be the one that you're going to want to watch. For you comic-specific fans, well, you're probably going to want to watch the last component of this video. I'll chapterize the whole thing and you can click your way on through for what you want to see. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Clifford Ball. Now, we've already talked about Clifford Ball twice on the channel, where we walk through the Duar the Accursed story as well as the Rald the Thief of Forth, which are two great sword and sorcery stories that really picked up the genre and moved it forward through 1937 into 1938. That wasn't all Clifford Ball wrote, though. He wrote 3 more stories thereafter, and these 3 other stories seem to be more prolonged in their release dates, and he was spending more time on them. I finished reading those 3 stories, and what I wanted to do today was do a bit of a wrap-up on the overall what I'm getting out of this guy. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1947. We're never going to get a chance to see more work out of him. We're never going to understand what else he was shooting towards with his writing style. But when you read into these last 3 stories, which we're going to walk through today, you can sort of see a direction that he's going in. And you also get to see little vignettes of perhaps what was going on inside his head, which is kind of cool. So we'll walk about that first. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to skip into the second component of today's video. This is one that I've been working on for quite some time that I'm quite excited about, but I'm going to throw out spoiler alerts now. This is a very limited scale project that I did, okay? There are clear flaws in the model that I've applied here, and I talk about those flaws in this particular video to make it very clear to you guys. I'm not saying my findings are 100% accurate. I'm just saying these are my findings from the experiment that I ran. So, second component of this one, we're not going to talk too much about it in the intro, but I am going to tell you this. It's got something to do with actual comic books and what you buy and how you buy them. Stick around, everybody. We'll see you shortly. All right, I think we got enough natural light, so let's just shoot this one as she is when we're at the desk here. So let's talk about this Clifford Ball guy. As I mentioned in the intro, the first part of this video is going to be where we actually walk through the final 3 stories that came out of this book, which is The Thief of Forth and Other Stories by Clifford Ball. Clifford Ball, as some of you may or may not know, is a writer that's credited in a little way, in carrying on the sword and sorcery mythos after the death of Robert E. Howard. He had a fairly short writing career that was unfortunately truncated, and there's not enough known about Clifford Ball to really know what happened in here. And we've already talked about the first 2 characters that came out of this series, and that was Duar the Accursed, which is sort of a King Conan type character, but a little bit more mysticized. And I only compare these to Conan just to give a frame of reference for our viewers here, because we talk about Conan here all the time. The second character, Rald, who actually is the Thief of Forth, is very much a younger Conan, more of a thieving Conan. Conan pretty much at that phase of his career where the Tower of the Elephant was written. Not chronologically as to when it was written, but when it takes place in Conan's life. Interesting characters, and again, you really see him carrying on that sword and sorcery mythos. But that wasn't what he was. He wasn't a one-trick pony, and I think it's important that we make this video to talk a little bit about this, because when I go online and I look up Clifford Ball and I try to find details about it, very sparse. There's very little known about him, and it's unfortunate, because clearly there was more here than meets the eye, like Transformers. Interesting. Duar the Accursed and the 2 Rald stories were published, the Duar the Accursed was in 37. The first Rald story was in 37. And the second Rald story in 38. Then you had the Swines of Aia. Swines of Aia. No, it was the Swines of Aia, late 38. Then you had The Little Man, 39, late 39. And then you had a pause. And then you got The Howl of the Werewolf. Am I getting that correctly? The Werewolf Howls, which was in 41. At that point in time, he actually signed up for active duty for the war. So, listen, I'm not going to give any grief on that one. Like, dude did what he thought he needed to do, and that really ended his writing career. The interesting part about this, though, is that he didn't pass away until 47. So, 41, he joins and becomes an active service member. The war ends. He has a little bit of time there when he's back, and then, unfortunately, he ends. And it really leaves you with a sense of, well, what could have been here? And would he have gone back and written more of the sword and sorcery mythos or not? let's take a look at the other three stories that he did right here. Let's talk about those a little bit and try to see if we can gauge where he's at, okay? The first one here being the Swines of Aea. And this is, I think, a key one because it kind of really shows you what this guy was all about. Clifford Ball, as we know from the brief amount when you read online about him, is that he really was a journeyman. He did a lot of different jobs and a lot of different careers in a short time. And it's interesting that when he did that, clearly he picked up all sorts of different skills. And the most interesting part of this is his literary skills, because it seems to me, again, I could be wrong here. I mean, if there's a Clifford Ball expert out there that wants to take it below, just, go ahead and do that down below and let me know. But the bottom line here is it seems to me that when he suddenly kicks into this and goes into this, he goes in whole hog. Look at the release dates on his stories. You'll see that they're very short in duration between the initial 4. Then suddenly things slow down. And this is also the point in time where he starts to go into what I think are things that were kind of stretching his own writing skill set. Now, whether that was at the behest of the editors at Weird Tales or not, I don't know. I would love to know, but I don't know. So let's talk about these stories and what they do tell us, though. So we've talked about Duar the Accursed. We've talked about Rald the Thief of Forth. In these, we see that Clifford Ball clearly knew a fair amount of some of the other major writers around that point in time. Clearly, he had an appreciation for Warlord of Mars. He got that. The white apes in the mountains and the... Does he actually mention the phrase Barsoom? I think he might. I think he might actually in the Rald story, or is it the Duar the Accursed? Either way, they're clearly mentioned in there, and you clearly know what they are. So you see he's got that level of skill set. Then you get into the Swine of Aea. Now, when I left off the last video, the Rald one, I said, I think the next one's kind of Greek. And the reason why I thought that is because of Aea. And I thought, okay, well, I think, and the Swines of Aea. And I was like, okay, well, this is kind of telling me where we're going to go in this one, if I'm reading into this correctly. But you never know. You can't judge a book by the cover. This is just the title. The story is one, actually, of the goddess Circe, the goddess/sorceress Circe, and the island of Aea. And, of course, turning men into swine, just like we saw in the Odyssey. And this is the point in time which actually is going to fall into something else that we talk about on the channel a fair amount, where people have asked, hey, Tennessee Fats, would you mind talking about what's in your library? Well, I'll tell you, I finished the story, The Swine of Aea, and I'm not going to spoil it too much for you guys here, because there is a slight twist in the middle of the story that wasn't really telegraphed. I mean, when you see it after the fact, it's just like when you watch the movie The Sixth Sense, like, well, I knew it was a ghost all along. Yeah, horse crap, okay? But when you actually go through the story and you finish it, you go, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. But there is a twist. I'm not going to spoil it. But what's interesting in this one is I went back and I actually went back to the source. Went over to the Tennessee Fats library and I grabbed one of my copies of the Odyssey. And I went into the chapter, what is it? Hold on here. It is called or not the chapter, I believe in the Odyssey, because this is an original piece of poetic literature. It's called a book, okay? The book of the Odyssey that we're talking about here is called... Oh, it's just called Circe in this one, which is kind of interesting. But I'll tell you, I went back to this one, and I was looking at it because when I looked at the way that these individuals were turned into swine in the story, because listen, it's obviously called the Swine of Aea, you kind of get a sense that obviously we're going to be going that direction if you're classically educated. If you're not classically educated, you don't know anything about this, and it's going to be a surprise, and you're going to think it's wonderful. Great. But I'll tell you, when she's turning these people into swine, and you're looking at the character and the way the character behaves, it doesn't quite match what Homer was talking about here. And what's interesting, because this one is actually translated and turned into more of an actual literary style, a written style, like a novel. So I actually went back and got my hard copy. This is my copy from when I studied the Odyssey in university. So for those of you who are wondering, yes, I am classically educated. And when you go into this one, and in this one, I had to go to the chapter, and the chapter is called... not chapter, the book. It's book 10. And it's called The Grace of the Witch, in which the actual Circe component comes into play. And here it's actually left in poetic prose, as opposed to like reading like in a novel format, which they did here. Interesting, because I was looking at them, I was like, well, maybe there's some sort of translation error here. But, and I really wanted to drill down on the idea of how did Circe actually turn people into apes? Not apes, swines. I'm still sticking on that apes of Barsoom thing. She did it with a wand. She did it first with a potion that made them forget who they were, and then she struck them with a wand. A little different than what we're seeing in the Swine of Aea story, but I'm not saying it's wrong. And what it was actually a fairly good story that shows me that the author is classically educated to some point. Now, a lot of people will look into this and they'll say, Tennessee Fats, a lot of people back in the 40s were classically educated because that was just part of the actual curriculum back then. I'm not going to say that's 100% true. Depending on where you are and where you're at, what you studied and what you actually didn't study, you might not have caught this stuff. You might not be reading Homer's The Odyssey, and there's a reason for that. It's kind of archaic and kind of doesn't apply. hasn't applied now for thousands of years. Beautiful piece of prose poetry. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't read the Odyssey. But what I am saying is it doesn't quite fit into modern day society anymore. This is really something for people who are studying historic works. So interesting that Clifford Ball had that sense to know what that was about, knew who the characters were, knew Circe was on an island called Aea, and knew that Circe was going to turn around and turn men into swine. Why? What was her motivation? That could be inferred. And you can go back, and I would encourage any of you to read the Odyssey either in its prose format or in its novelization. I'll call it novelization, but it's not really a novelization format, and actually get through what Circe was doing. Interesting character within Homeric literature. It really is. I'm not going to go too much further than that because it's kind of, figure it out yourself, okay? So that was an interesting one. It gave us sort of a vignette into the life of Clifford Ball. You know he's classically educated, and that's kind of a neat thing. And I'll tell you, when I was reading that story, was thinking one thing entirely about one of the characters. And all I'm going to say here is I was thinking, this character here, I'm pretty sure that's a Cyclops. I was wrong, clearly wrong, but again, maybe I was jumping the shark on that one. Either way, I left that one alone. Okay, the other two stories though, the one that comes in after that, that's an interesting one. The Little Man. It's actually a piece of almost horror type material, and I'm not going to spoil it. That one truly has a Sixth Sense twist to it. You're talking M. Night Shyamalan all over this thing, and it is just fantastic. I really enjoyed The Tiny Man. It was a fun story, had a lot of prose to it, had a lot of sense of creating character and theme and atmosphere. And it was interesting that a lot of the atmosphere was brought in through the use of a secondary character who was the commissioner of police, just because you could hear in his language and how he's described as talking to his compatriots and his subordinates what he's like, and that sense of theme and tone and atmosphere. It was really quite good, but not anywhere even close to something classical. If I was to guess, I would say that piece takes place maybe in the 1920s, maybe the 1930s. Pretty close to contemporaneous to when this actual story was written. Maybe not exactly. I get a sense that it was somewhat older. And again, that's all through the feeling in the story. So you've got Clifford Ball here showing that he's really learning his chops in this shorter story, where he's creating more of a sense of tension. Almost, what I say, H.P. Lovecraftian? I would say it's pretty close. I would say the actual sense of tension is pretty Lovecraftian when you're going through it. It's very close to those New England horror stories that he wrote, where a lot of it is just building up that tension. So, interesting story, that. The last one was a weird one, though. And this was called The Werewolf Howls, or The Howl of the Werewolf, or something. Anyway, in this, you see Clifford Ball clearly taking the idea and the mythos of what a werewolf was and throwing it right out the window, which we know Robert E. Howard did as well. Robert E. Howard dabbled in taking known archetypes of horror and changing them. He changed this with werewolves, and I believe there's actually a written letter that you can find online where it was somebody that wrote into Weird Tales complaining about how the fact that he had broken the conventional mold of a vampire, which, listen, it's I'm sorry, are there really vampires out there? Last time I checked, not that I've seen. So can you really say, well, no, this is what a vampire does, and this is what a vampire... Listen, we can all be literary critics as much as we want to. But it was interesting to see Clifford Ball doing that same thing here, where he took the idea of a werewolf. Obviously, it's got a werewolf in it. I'm not throwing a spoiler on that. I mean, the story's called The Howl of the Werewolf Howls, something like that. And in this idea of how a werewolf is created is twisted. The actions of the werewolf, not so much. But really a twisted story, and it leaves you on a noted cliffhanger, like a serious cliffhanger. You as the reader can sit back and say to yourself, I believe this is what's going to happen next, but guess what? You'll never know, because that unfortunately was the last Clifford Ball work. It's a shame. It really is. So what would have happened here? What can we think here? Because a lot of people, when I'm hearing the comment, are making the comment, this is the guy who carries Swords and Sorcery forward after the untimely death of Robert E. Howard. Do I agree with that sentence? Do I think that given the chance, Clifford Ball, if he did continue writing during the time that he had before his untimely passing, would have written more Sword and Sorcery prose? Or do I think he was actually expanding out? I believe he was actually expanding out. The first 3 stories out of the 6, absolutely. These are Sword and Sorcery and fantasy and what they call it, action adventure. I think that's the term they were using at the time. Very much so, and it matches quite closely. The last 3, though, and you really saw the transition with the Swine of Aea. you saw that this was changing and his writing style was changing from one that was focused on sword and sorcery, and he was now drawing in something else. Very developed characters, a beautiful piece of prose. And honestly, I really enjoyed that story, but I don't think he would have gone back to sword and sorcery. I think he was transitioning quite comfortably out of it. You saw it through the masterpiece of his that was the longest story of the Swine of Aeya, and then you saw that transition into him throwing more work in less words into the tiny man. And you saw that werewolf story again, a very short story, but with a hell of an impact. And you're seeing this is where he's really coming to. Granted, the Rald character, if he'd applied those same skills and those same characteristics and what he was shooting for back to Rald and back to Duar the Accursed, I believe those would have come out as just masterpieces as well. But they were written at a time where you can clearly see the writing style can be perceived as chunky as you're going through the material. So what do we think of this one? Well, I'll tell you this much. I actually really enjoyed this book, and I'm not one that goes out and typically finds a lot of, action, adventure, and fantasies type stuff. I really do stick to some of the more classical stuff. I stick to my Robert E. Howard, as you guys know. So for me to go through this one, I really enjoyed the Sword and Sorcery stories at the beginning. And honestly, the last 3 stories in here, which weren't sword and sorcery, really surprised me in the writing skills and the technical skills that I was seeing within it, and in giving me more of a picture of who Clifford Ball was. Very interesting book. I like this one. I really do. Again, this is the cover on the front of what the original Weird Tales was that actually had Rald and the Thief of Forth. And this back here is the story from 1939 and the cover that was the Swine of Aeya cover. Very interesting. I did enjoy this. I would encourage any of you, if you're interested in learning more about Clifford Ball, there's a nice quick synopsis at the front of this, but you can get yourself on the Google, go on the internet, do that whole thing. You'll find it. There's enough information there and some Wikipedia articles. And I know there's one guy out there that I found his site, and he apparently is a researcher of Clifford Ball, and there's a lot of detail in there. I would encourage you to do that as well if you want to learn more about him. If you're interested in picking this one up, get yourself on the Amazon. It's there. It's sitting right there waiting to be bought. This copy, actually quite interesting, produced in Bolton, Ontario, which floored me. I was like, really? Bolton? What the hell are they on? Kind of an interesting thing that just a little bit down the road, this book actually had its birth. Kind of funny. Anyways, that's what we think of this one, everybody. And that's the final roundup on Clifford Ball and the Thief of Forth. Now, what we'll do here is we'll wrap this bad boy up. And for those of you who are Sword and Sorcery and Robert E. Howard fans, specifically to the channel, if you want to stop watching now, and again, I'm not doing these videos for all sorts of pagey clicks and views and what have you. I'm doing them because they're fun. Feel free, head on out, and we'll see you in the next video. But for those of you who are Canadian collectors out there who've been following that little side project that I've mentioned a couple times in the Easter eggs at the end, you know that little thing where I've been saying, I've got this double pull list. Stick around here. You might get some value out of this. All right, it is secret project time. Let's tell you guys what I'm doing here, and let's actually have an honest heart-to-heart chat. Well, it'll be somewhat one-sided because, again, I'm the one talking, and unfortunately, if you're speaking at home when you're watching this, I can't hear your response. Technology really needs to fix that, it really does. Now, you can tickety below, tick. That's fine, you could do that as well. So, here's where we're at, and this is why this particular video is sitting at the end of another piece of content. This one might irk some people, and for those of you who are irked, I'm going to apologize now, okay? I decided to do something. It's something that probably is going to get me into a fair amount of hot water if I'm actually right in my hypothesis. As I mentioned in some of my other videos, one of the things that I do is I like to test things. I actually like to know what's going on. It's something that's somewhat important to me. And as you guys know, who've been watching the channel, I'm here buying comics in Canada. That's right, I buy comics in Canada. Yes, my name is Tennessee Fats, and I buy comics in Canada because I live here in Canada. Yes, I know, it's weird, but it's a thing. Anyways, sometimes I buy comics in the States. Well, I'll tell you, over the last bunch of years, one of the things that I've been doing is I've been going into my local comic shop and I'm picking up things that are on my pull list. And when I'm looking at them and I'm getting them home, I'm saying, why is this a reader copy? Now, here's where we're going to come in, and I'm going to throw in a comment right now. I personally don't care if all of my comics are reader copies. Because you know what? I read my comics. So at the end of the day, they should be reader copies because I've read them. But I should have the privilege of taking that book from brand new, pristine condition and making it a reader copy my darn self. So it seems strange to me that when I'm paying this full price for these things, that I'm constantly getting reader copies. And it's not that this is specific to this particular shop, because I go to where I have my local comic shop and where I have my pull list, and then I go to other shops in the area, and I pick up new books from there as well from time to time. And you know what I find? They're all carrying the same thing. Now, this is just anecdotally. This is me and my old man memory saying, this must be what's happening here, because I can't possibly be misconceiving this. Well, I don't necessarily trust my old man brain, so I did a thing. So, as you guys know, one of the things I got really excited about was when Titan Comics decided it was going to relaunch Conan. And I was like, okay, fantastic. I love everything about this, let's do it. But at the same time, I said to myself, wait, this is the perfect test project right here. So, contacted my local comic shop down the street and I said, guys, get me a pull list. I want every darned copy you can get me of this, and we're going to get this up and running, and fantastic. And they did. So we're now 5 issues into me buying this particular book. Actually, issue 6 I actually have now as well. And issue 6 should be coming up from my US poll as well, because that's the other thing I did. I contacted a US company and set up a poll there. Now, a poll in the US is a little different. So just like here, I go to my local comic shop and I say, listen, this is what I want you to buy me. Buy me everything that's related to this title. And they say, do you want all the covers or some? And I said, well, in this particular case, I say, give me all the covers. So with the US one, though, this is a pretty interesting thing. When you sign into this account, you can then get access to the previews magazine yourself. And you start going through and you pick one with this. And you add them all to your checkout. You pay for it. And then you have a choice as to how often you want to have it shipped to you. I've been choosing to have these books shipped to me monthly. So now we're at the point now where I literally have 5 issues of side-by-side covers where I can say, well, which one actually is better? The reason I did this is because I wanted to stop the sort of anecdotal nonsense going on in my head, and I wanted to say which one actually is better. At one point in time, side-by-side comparison, what is it? So for all the US books that I've been getting, I've been gingerly putting them into my bags and boards. I've been writing on the back of the word US distribution. For all my Canadian ones, same thing, gingerly putting them into the bags and boards and just leaving it unlabeled. That way I know the ones unlabeled are Canadian, the ones that are labeled are American. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna go side by side on these. I have 26 issues to go through. Yes, 26 issues. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna head down to the Hall of Comics, where I've got this set up where I've got my side-by-side table, and I'm going to start going through this. Now, through the magic of super marionation, what we're going to do is we're going to take this little piece of footage and we're going to speed the whole thing up, because you guys don't need to see all that. And while we're doing that, I'll start talking to you guys about some of the methodologies that I'm applying here and what specifically I'm looking for. Not any more of this intro stuff. Let's get into the actual books. All right, let's get into this. All right, so as I mentioned in the intro, here's what we're doing today. We are sitting here in the Hall of Comics. We are going to go through 26 of these books, and we are going to figure out which ones are better subjectively and objectively, mostly objectively, based on what I see today. Those ones that are better that are Canadian are going to go in the Canadian column. Those ones that are better than American distribution are going to go to the American distribution column. At the end of the day, I'm hopeful these come out even. Now, there's 26 books here. Let's speed this up and get through it quickly, shall we? All right, so we're sitting here watching this now through the magic of super marionation, and there's me on the screen up there doing my whole doodle with the tickety and going through the box and looking at comic books, and I'm sitting here after the fact recording this. You know, the funny part about this is this really does bring into mind that whole concept in physics that all time exists all at once, everywhere. It's really a weird thing seeing this retrospectively while I'm yakking over it. I tell you, technology's really come some weird places. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. Weird old man aside, done. Let's get to the topic at hand. So let's talk about the methodology. Well, I tell you guys, this isn't rocket science. And it's not brain surgery either. Literally, the process is just me taking the books side by side at one single point in time. So it's not me looking at it and then going back to another one 6 months later. Literally side by side and counting the number of defects in the book. Now, I will be very clear. I am not comparing publishers' defects because, to be honest, there are publishers' defects in the first 5 issues of this run, and it happens mostly around issue number 4. There was one weird one on issue number 2, I think, as well, if I remember correctly. But it's common to both the Canadian and the US copies, so we're not going to punish either of them for that. All I'm doing is counting the physical defects and damages to the book that have occurred since the time it was produced to the time where I'm looking at them side by side. Now, the goal here is when you compare one to the other, you're going to find one has a certain number more defects than the other. And sometimes you're looking at defects and you're looking at them for level of severity as well. And in that particular instance, that's really coming into play when I'm looking at a tiebreaker. So for example, if I've got 2 books where I've got exactly 5 issues with each of them,
And I'm looking at those 5 issues and I can say, well, hold on, in book number 1, 3 of these issues are fixable through simple repair techniques. Then that's better than book number 2 if only one of them is repairable in book number 2. You get what I'm saying? So think about this in the instance of, like, for example, surface dirt. That's a great example. A lot of surface dirt, for some reason, I keep seeing on Canadian books. I literally just picked up issue number 6 from the store the other day. Had to get out the dry eraser on that one and actually go through it because the entirety of the front cover, right down the spine, was covered in surface dirt. It was the strangest thing ever. It's a brand new book, and it's already got dirt over this top of the staples, the top and the bottom, front and back. Like, really an odd thing. Now, granted, you can only erase on certain colors, mostly white, by the way. But you do make the effort where you can to try to see if you can repair that. Surface dirt, for example, is something that would be easily repaired. It's easily done. You just take a typical dry erase technique. There are a lot of them out there, and you just fix it your darn self. A lot of people are not going to be comfortable with that, and they're going to pay somebody to do that, and that's entirely their choice too. I'm not going to harp on that at all, but I am going to say, obviously, something that's repairable is better than something that isn't. I'll give you an example of something that isn't. Spine tick that breaks color. That's a good one. Actually, the cover split along the fold. That's another great one. A great example, actually, that came up through this process that I found in issue number 1, which had to do with the map variant cover. Now, the map variant cover was cardstock that was printed in high gloss and then folded around a regular, I think it was cover A. Now, what happens with cardstock is, and I don't know if most of you know this, is you apply too much pressure to it, you open and close it too many times, that cardstock is going to split. Now, when I was looking at the map variants, I was surprised to find that these brand new books, literally less than 5 months old, that honestly did not even see reading time with me. They literally came directly out of delivery to me. I looked at them briefly and said, that's a nice map from the front and the back, and then folded them up, well, not folded, closed them up and put them inside bags and boards. There was no reading. And both of those covers, both the American and the US, had a fair amount of split where the fibers were coming out where the crease is on the fold. A strange thing. And I gotta tell you, part of me wonders whether that is actually a manufacturer's defect or whether that is a handling issue. And when I looked at them side by side, one of the big tiebreakers when I was comparing to the Canadian and US versions of that book that I had was the amount of that split. At the end of the day, I think if I remember correctly, the American one, or the US distribution one, I can't say American, it actually did have less splitting than the Canadian distribution one. Now, I don't know if that is an issue of just, hey, luck of the draw and these are the 2 books you got. I don't know if that's an issue of maybe one had less pressure applied to it, flattening it than the other. I don't know. And I'm sure there's a lot of other comic restoration and paper experts out there that are going to give a variety of other reasons as to why you would see that fiber split on that crease. All I know is when I'm comparing them and I'm saying which one's better, which one's worse, well, obviously the one with less of that splitting is better. And that's really it. I mean, that's the methodology. There's no reason to go into this any further and try to talk it up to be a bigger thing because it ain't a bigger thing. Anyways, let's finish this. Oh, look, there I've got the map thing right there. Look at me going there. Because one of these I have with a clear back so I can see the map when I'm actually storing it. I think that's the Canadian version that I have. I kept it in there because I got that one first. Anyways, you see where I'm going here. There's no reason for us to sit here and watch 22 minutes of this sped up footage. We can cut this thing now. All you guys needed to know was basically what I'm looking for. All right, let's take a look at these results now, because I got to tell you, my hope on this one, when I actually started this one, was even though I had a hypothesis that the Canadian distribution model was potentially hurting comics, which is why I'm getting reader copies when I'm buying books locally to me here in Canada, I had hoped that that was a wrong assumption. I had hoped that for some reason, this is just some skew on what I'm seeing, and that can't possibly be right. I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm going to jump right into the results here, and then we'll talk about them. But then I want to actually take a moment and talk about the failures that potentially are within this very test. I'm not saying that I'm infallible. Dear God, this test is entirely fallible in a variety of manners. But let's discuss those failures. Let's discuss what the opportunities are for improvements, and maybe how somebody wants to do something different next time, and maybe you'll get a different conclusion. Here's what we got. Yeah. Now, you can see here, when you're looking at this, and this is the disappointing part, is there's a lot of letters over here. There's not a lot of letters over here. In total of 26 books, 7 of the Canadian distribution system ones actually were in better condition than the American ones.
In an even model where there's no systemic bias and potentially the way these things are being spat out, and if they are going through the same distribution system, in theory, you would have it be something closer to 50-50. That is not what we're seeing here. We are seeing a clear imbalance. 7 out of 26 books going through the Canadian distribution system were better than the ones coming through the American distribution system. That means the other 19 through the American system were in better condition than the ones I was buying through the Canadian distribution system. That's not even close to 50-50. That is a material swing. This is somewhat disappointing for me, I'm not going to lie. And I imagine this is probably going to be somewhat disappointing for other people who are watching this video when they're looking at these points, these data points, and saying, well, that's not good. Well, hold on. Let's just pump the brakes here for a second, okay? I did this as a private test of what I wanted to check. And this is the cheapest way I thought I could do it. Here's one of the big failures within this actual methodology that I've used, okay? 1, I've only chosen to test books within the last 6 months. Really, that's all I've done. I have chosen to test books that are only coming out from Conan issue number 1 through Conan issue number 5. Now, I already have Conan issue number 6. I'm not including that here because I don't have the American copies of that yet through my pull list. But that's a very finite window. What if something particular has happened in the last 5 to 6 months that skewed this? That's an abnormality. That's something that has actually caused this material discrepancy in quality of books between the American distribution system and the Canadian distribution system. This could be something temporary. I don't know. More time and more testing would be necessary to actually cure that failure. Another particular failure that's within this particular model. Well, I only tested things coming out of Titan Comics. That's pretty material, okay? And here's why I bring this one up as a key kicking point here. Titan Comics, when I was emailing back and forth with my American supplier on this one, around issue number 4, something happened with their quality control and distribution. Not in the comics. Listen, Titan Comics, you guys are producing phenomenal books. I love the Conan series. You're going through the art, the writing, just beautiful. But for some reason in distribution, there seems to be something falling short here. I got copies in with my pull out of my American system, and when I looked at it, there was some where I had spine ticks running right down it. Other ones where I had material color rubs running right down them, and I said, this can't be right. So I reached out to my American supplier, and I said, listen, these copies were crap. Like, are there not better ones you can send me with my next pull? And their response was, no, there isn't, because unfortunately, this seems to be systemic with what we're getting right now for this particular title from this particular publisher. We can't get any better. So maybe, that's something that's leading to a skew within this. Maybe Titan's distribution model is different than what we're seeing in other companies. And I do believe that is actually the case, because in the same time that I've been getting these Titan books, I have got pull items added to my list that have been shipped up to me from the States, where I've got DC books, and I've got Marvel books, and I'm looking at them, and I'm not seeing any of these systemic issues like this one line of color rub that runs down along the spine on both the front and the back. I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing this strange line of tick that's about 3 inches up from the bottom on the back for most of the issues, especially the early issues. It's just a strange white line. Now, that's on the Canadian and the US version. So I don't know what that's all about. But because I've only focused on Titan, maybe there is something specific to their distribution model, which is what's leading to this material discrepancy. That's another issue that we're having at hand here. The final failure in this model, and I think this is a big one that needs to be spoken to clearly and I need to address right now. Hey, Olive, you coming to help? Thumbs up. I like it. Here's what we got. The books that are coming out and they're in this sample, a lot of them, well, the American ones have only come from one shop. I know they're from one shop. I'm aware. I'm bringing it up. Relax. They're from one shop. The ones that are coming from the Canadian shops are coming from a variety of shops around the area. Most of them are coming from my local comic shop down the street. But there are some other ones that have been added in that I picked up from another shop that's in the other direction. There are other copies that I have picked up when I've gone out to Ottawa or Montreal. And I have tried to spread that sample around. So when I had them in the box, a lot of the ones that were in there were ones not just from my local comic shop, but also from other shops in the area. You can't tell me that this is specific to just all Canadian shops, that all Canadian shops are doing the exact same errors to the books. That does not make sense. If all of the shops are getting their books from the same distributing source, where potentially errors are occurring in the handling of the books, well, that might make sense. 3 failures that I wanted to throw in right off the bat. And I wanted to say these are flaws within this model, because this is a very limited sample size and a very short-term test. Honestly, I believe if somebody else wanted to do this more justice, what they could do is spread this sample size across a variety of different actual publishing companies, getting books in from DC, Marvel, maybe Dark Horse, maybe Image, and Titan. Throw them all in. Do the sample test for maybe 2 years. That'll give you 24 issues of any particular title. Make sure you're systemically sticking to the same title so that you're knowing that there isn't any real shift in the actual dynamic of how they're being produced or distributed. The last thing that I would say is when you're getting these in, I would suggest you actually spread this. And this is where it becomes quite costly, where if you say, I want to get issue, 1074 of Action Comics. I'm going to pick that up out in Saskatchewan this month, but 1075 I'm going to pick up out in New Brunswick next month. That way you know you're getting a full Canadian spread as to how these things are being distributed. And I would suggest the exact same thing be done with the American side. Now, that being said, what have I drawn out of this? Well, let's draw this up into conclusion time. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up and do some conclusion time. Well, here's where I'm at, guys. I know as far as sample size goes, and as far as an actual comprehensive study goes, this is not good enough. I get that. Somebody needs to do a much larger study on this to actually find out what's happening here. Do we need to audit this whole distribution process? Is there a need to actually audit it? Or is the sample that I've got so biased by those 3 errors that I pointed out earlier that that's steering it in this direction? Is one of those 3 things really throwing this off? I don't know. Here's where I'm at though. I read Conan. Honestly, I think we're fairly basic with that one. I think we're all on the same page on that. I read Conan, I read the new Titan Conans. The other thing that I do is I will pick up the odd story that's not Conan. For example, Transformers, I'm picking that one up right now. I really enjoyed Void Rivals. There's a bunch of other books that I've shown you guys that I've said this is what I'm reading right now, and they're really good. And when I'm getting the books, I would rather I turn them into reader copies. I don't want somebody that's not even here in my house reading the books with me, turning these things into reader copies, because it just ruins the point of why am I paying full price for these things? That just makes no sense. I have not discussed financial aspects of this. There's a reason for that. The financial schmozzle around this whole thing is a much larger picture. I will tell you this though. I did on the back of a napkin ask myself, am I actually saving money doing this? Here's the bottom line. I'm just about at par, and that includes the monthly shipping cost of getting these things in here. Now, part of that is because of the discount that's offered by the particular shop that I'm buying from in the States right off the bat. The day I'll buy these books, I automatically am receiving a discount, and they're offering that to everybody. That's not just me because I'm Tennessee Fats. You can sign up with an account with them too. Instantaneously on your previews, you're going to start getting things a lot cheaper. And you know, that does make a big difference, even when you're paying in Yankee bucks instead of the cheaper Canadian dollar. Something to think about, guys. I'm not here to actually push one company over another, but you might want to go on the the interwebs, that thing. Just get out there and tickety, see what you can find out, because you could actually save yourself a little bit of money here. And if you are concerned about the quality of the books, you might actually find out these are actually getting you better quality books. Weird, right? Well, everybody, that wraps up this one. I gotta tell you, this was sort of a mishmash, sort of anthology episode for me, and I really wanted to get something out to you guys this week that finished up that Clifford Ball book, not necessarily Rald, because I just finished reading it. And then if I don't get it out now, I'm gonna forget it, and I'm gonna have to reread the whole thing later. So I was glad to get that out. But the other thing that I really wanted to get out was actually wrapping up this secret project that I've been working on now for about 6 months. So glad to get that done and out of the way. I now know what direction I'm going to be taking with my books, buying them going forward. Hopefully you guys have a chance to actually take some of the information I've given you here if you are in Canada buying comics. If you're choosing to make a change, well, that's a choice you have to make. I'm not telling you to. I'm not saying you necessarily should. Bear in mind what I've told you in the sample. Bear in mind what I've told you the errors might be. Maybe things will be different for you. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that one. We'll see you in the next video. Yeah.